with Japan enhance defense cooperation with Australia, what types of operations are explicitly ruled out on Philippine soil or in waters? Example, preemptive strikes, offensive cyber operations, long-range missiles deployments.
O yan mga kababayan, pinag-uusapan po natin dito sa video na to na pinapanood natin ay yung capability ng ating bansa mga kababayan. Wala ho tayong capability makipag-gyera. Hindi po tayo armed and equipped. Yung pondo ng taong bayan kinulimbat ng manang babuaya. Yung pa kaya bumili ng mga pangdepensa natin dito sa bansa. Hindi po natin kailangan makipag-away. Ang kailangan po natin makipagkaibigan para marami po tayong mga sources ng mga pagkakitaan. Dito sa video na to mga kababayan, sinupalpal ni Senator Marcoleta itong si Defense Secretary Gibo at saka itong si General Brawner mga kababayan. Tingnan yung mga pagmumukha nila sa video halos napapahiya po sila dahil totoo naman yung sinasabi ni Senator Marcoleta na wala tayong capability. Pwede ba siguro cannon mga kababayan? Water cannon, kayang-kaya. Yan sa West Philippine Sea pwede. Mga malilit lang na mga bangka, ayan, pwede siguro. Pero ayan po mga kababayan, bago tayo tumulak dyan, isang share, like, subscribe lamang po para lagi po tayong updated sa mga kaganapan dito sa ating bansa. Ito, wag na po nating patagalin mga kababayan. Ito na po si Senator Marcoleta.
Today. Mr. President, I'd like to start with defense alliances with the United States, Japan, and Australia. The first question is, to what extent does the 2026 budget assume U.S., Japanese, or Australian case of a major WPS contingency?
Well, Mr. President, there's no particular item for the U.S., Japan, and Australian arrangement. It forms part under the visiting forces arrangement, Mr. President. And the exercises being conducted is subsumed under the operational budgets of the different agencies, Mr. President. So there's no particular item for the U.S., for Japan, for Australia. It's subsumed under the exercises being conducted and subsumed under those budgets, Mr. President.
And that will mean, Mr. President, that no critical capabilities are still being outsourced from these allies.
Mr. President, the arrangement between our allies is focused on different aspects, no? Intelligence sharing, cybersecurity partnerships, as well as interoperability arrangements. We also purchase a large amount of our modernization from our allies, particularly Korea and the United States.
But, Mr. President, if we consider the Mutual Defense Treaty between the United States and the Philippines, a treaty which was signed in 1951, I don't think the United States is accomplishing its obligation under the treaty, more particularly Article 2. May I cite that particular provision, Mr. President? Article 2 of the Mutual Defense Treaty says that in order to more effectively achieve the objectives of this treaty, parties, meaning the U.S. and the Philippines, separately and jointly by self-help or mutual aid, will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. Can we say, Mr. President, that at present the Philippines is capable of resisting armed attack?
The answer from the Department of National Defense depends on the degree of the armed attack, Mr. President. And that's why we have interoperability exercises with our allies, Mr. President, so that we can be prepared for any eventuality, including disaster preparedness, Mr. President, which is, I think, a much more critical preparedness activity that we need to endeavor.
The treaty, Mr. President, did not distinguish the nature and kind of armed attack. It just said both parties should be capacitated to repel armed attack. So the question is our country in a position to repel arm attack? Let's say
Yeah.
from Vietnam.
Well, it really depends, Mr. President, on the degree of the arm attack, Mr. President. So,
They should consider the strength of the Vietnamese army. Can we just... we cannot imagine how much force or these countries who may want to attack us will not tell us. Kaya nga, paano natin magagamit yung Article 2? Is it not proper for us to at least make ourselves capable of whatever attack? That should be the ideal objective. And the Mutual Defense Treaty should be able to accomplish this. This is the main objective. That's why I'm asking you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, one of the aim of the DND is to continue to modernize our capability, Mr. President. That's why we have allocated 60 billion pesos in the budget to continuously support the modernization of our armed forces, Mr. President.
But that is not answering the question, Mr. President. I'm asking whether our country is in a position to repel armed attack. This is the objective of the Mutual Defense Treaty.
Yan.
If we continuously hide upon the argument that we are perennially being assisted by the United States, Japan, and Australia, we're compromising our sovereignty and strategic autonomy, Mr. President. So ba't meron pa po tayong Mutual Defense Treaty? We cannot even answer this simple question.
Mr. President, with the present capability and the continuous upgrading of our military capability, the objective is to deter instances like what you have mentioned, Mr. President.
You are saying that we are in a position to deter, for example, China from attacking us? Can we now deter China from attacking us?
Yes, Mr. President, the Secretary answered in the affirmative.
So what are the deterrents? Or what is the deterrence, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, as we have seen in the news that our troops are continuously training, continuously holding exercises. So with the capability of our troops and also with the partnership with our allies, Mr. President, components that can bolster our deterrence, Mr. President.
That is the only answer that you can provide, Mr. President.
Mr. President, that is the objective of the Department of National Defense, Mr. President.
But, Mr. President, I'm asking in relation to the Mutual Defense Treaty. This is a very important treaty. It is, I think, 74 years old. If we maximize that treaty,
Correct.
hindi naman po siguro tatagal. After 74 years, hindi pa po natin masabi na kung ano ang ating napala dito sa Mutual Defense Treaty. Mas matanda pa po sa akin ang treaty ito, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, from my observation, yung interoperability, yung balikatan exercises is a clear evidence that we are operationalizing the treaty. Yung treaty ho, papel lang ho yan eh. Kung hindi ho nating ilalagay yan sa action through the balikatan exercises, through modernizing our capability, to coming up with our own modernization program, hindi ho talaga magiging beneficial yung treaty na yan. So makikita naman ho natin na tuloy-tuloy po ang paglalaan po ng pondo sa ating AFP at tuloy-tuloy rin po nila ginagawa yung kanilang makakaya with the limited budget that we have. No? Sana ho mas malaki, but with the limited budget that we have, yung kanilang mga exercises para po makaresponde ho sila kung ano man ang pwedeng mangyari.
Sabi po nyo kanina, Mr. President, wala naman po tayong na-outsource sa ating mga partners. It is inconsistent, Mr. President. Tinatanong ko po kanina, gaano po sa ating budget ang ma-assume natin na suporta mula sa tatlong mga kaibigan natin? Ang sabi po ninyo, wala.
Yeah. May nabanggit ko ho kanina, like for example, intelligence sharing, nabanggit ko rin, nasabi ko rin ho kanina yung cybersecurity capabilities and cybersecurity capacitation. Yun po yung mga ilan sa mga ina-outsource ho natin. At partnership, hindi lang ho outsourcing, but in my view, these are partnerships. Ang mundo ho naman ay interconnected na ho ngayon at hindi ho natin pwedeng sabihin na tayo lang ang gagawa. So we have partnerships with our allies, Mr. President. But a more detailed discussion should be limited to a executive session, and the Secretary is more than willing to brief His Honor on the details of those outsourcing and partnership, Mr. President. Marami ho dito may national security concern. Pero open naman po ang ating Secretary na pag-usapan yan through an executive session.
What clear red lines and conditions has the Philippines communicated to the US, Japan, or Australia regarding the use of EDCA sites, yung joint patrols po natin and exercises, so that our territory is not used for offensive operations unrelated to Philippine defense and security?
Yeah. Well, under the Constitution ho, hindi ho pwede silang magtayo ng base militar ho dito. So itong mga EDCA sites ay ginagamit ho to for joint exercises as well as disaster preparedness. So ang may-ari po ng mga lupa ay tayo pa rin, ang Pilipinas pa rin. Ang nag-ooperate rin po ay tayo pa rin, ang Pilipinas pa rin. So wala ho silang responsibility sa pag-ooperate ho nun.
Given the inclusion of EDCA, Mr. President, EDCA sites near Taiwan Strait and the WPS, what risk assessment has DND made that these facilities will not become targets in a possible US-China conflict, not our own making?
Based on the reply of the good secretary, their risk assessment is very low, Mr. President.
With the reciprocal access agreement with Japan, enhanced defense cooperation with Australia, what types of operations are explicitly ruled out on Philippine soil or in waters? Example, preemptive strikes, offensive cyber operations, long-range missiles deployments. If you can please specify, Mr. President.
Ang limitation po ay offensive operation and anything that will and anything that will pertain to engagement in war, Mr. President, as an instrument of national policy, Mr. President.
Mr. President, does the Department of National Defense agree that a decision of the Supreme Court interpreting and applying a provision of EDCA automatically becomes part of EDCA itself?
The reply of the Secretary, Mr. President, it's part of the ruling and it's part of the ratio decidendi, Mr. President.
Yes, of course. The decision of the Supreme Court always form part of our legal system, Mr. President. And we're referring to Ochoa, Sagisag versus Ochoa, Mr. President, where the Supreme Court interpreted Article 4 of EDCA regarding the unimpeded access of the U.S. to a military equipment, material, and supply that it has prepositioned in the Philippines. That is correct, Mr. President.
Mr. President, if that is in the ruling, then that is correct, Mr. President.
And therefore, Mr. President, you have to agree that such interpretation of the Supreme Court should automatically form part of EDCA, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Subject to the full Constitution.
And therefore, the DND has the legal mandate to implement that interpretation of the Supreme Court.
Yes, Mr. President, that's correct.
Ang sabi po kasi sa kasong ito, o decision na ito, Mr. President, it was interpreted, meaning Article 4 of EDCA, that the U.S. has unimpeded access only to those military equipment, materiel, and supplies that the Philippines has consented to be prepositioned on Philippine territory.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
could the DND please detail how exactly it is implementing that decision of the Supreme Court, specifically what consent mechanism it is using? Is it the Mutual Defense Board or the Security Engagement Board?
Well, Mr. President, all channels are
Ba't di ho kasi magsalita itong si Gibo, Teodoro?
I was informed, Mr. President, that
Bulong-bulong
the boards are merely recommends, and the secretaries of the DFA and the DND are the ones who approve it, Mr. President.
When we say the boards, Mr. President, we're referring to MDB and the SEB.
Yes, Mr. President, correct.
How many come from the Philippine side, Mr. President? And what is the voting requirement?
It's 7-7, Mr. President, in the board.
But the board is billion.
Has there been an instance, Mr. President, when the Philippines did not allow the U.S. to preposition a certain military equipment, materiel, or personnel?
Well, Mr. President, the Secretary relayed that they're not at liberty to divulge that the answer to that, Mr. President.
May we know the reason, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, because it forms part of the Mutual Defense Treaty, and it's also part of the operational security, and the President needs to approve the release of that information, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the armed forces of the Philippines mentioned that certain U.S. missiles should be prepositioned in the Philippines. Are these nuclear-capable missiles, Mr. President?
Mr. President, no, they're not. They're not nuclear missiles, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the 2006 U.S.-Bulgaria Defense Cooperation Agreement, the 2009 U.S.-Poland Status of Forces Agreement, and the 2014 U.S.-Australian Force Posture Agreement all explicitly require the United States forces to notify and obtain the exclusive consent of the host government regarding the type of defense equipment, supplies, or material to be propositioned. The U.S.-Australia agreement even provides for a snapback by the Australian Parliament. The Philippines, or the Philippine EDCA, does not have such consent provision. Why is the Department of National Defense not insisting on that insertion of such sovereign provision, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, that provision, the reply of the Secretary, the provision is not necessary because
Why?
the guiding document will be the Constitution, Mr. President.
But, Mr. President, would not such sovereign provision ensure the independence of our foreign and security policies? Aside, of course, from the Constitution.
Well, Mr. President, any action in relation to the EDCA sites, the Philippine side will have the final say, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces recently said that all the investigations into and protest against the government corruption are causing destabilization and benefiting China. Do you agree that the work of the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee is destabilizing the Philippine government?
Well, personally, Mr. President, that's part of our mandate under the Constitution.
Yes.
And the investigation is in aid of legislation, Mr. President.
Kaya nga po, kaya hindi tayo nagdi-destabilize kahit na po tayo ay gumagawa ng pagdinig laban sa corruption na nangyayari sa ating bansa, lalong-lalo na po itong karumal-dumal na flood control projects na nakita po natin kung ano ang...
Mr. President, well, thank you, Mr. President, for asking that question. It gives the Chief of Staff the opportunity to clarify and also to straighten the answers, Mr. President. He never said that the investigation would lead to destabilization or any instability in our political system. What he mentioned is withdrawal of the support of the AFP will lead to destabilization. So, and that's very clear, Mr. President, the difference between the responsibilities of the legislature in aid of legislation and also the withdrawal of the support of the military, Mr. President.
Do you agree in the Philippines' one China policy? Do you agree with Japan that any forcible unification of China and Taiwan is a threat to Philippine security?
Well, Mr. President, the policy is we adhere to the one China policy. But of course, the actions succeeding to that will be subject for discussion, Mr. President.
And you do not agree with Japan?
Mr. President, for now that is hypothetical and it's yeah, correct. It's hypothetical and that is the statement of Japan, Mr. President.
Mr. President, Vietnam's policy of no military alliance has enabled it to develop an indigenous capability to produce military drones. Do you think the Philippines should forever rely on external military assistance or try to stand on our own?
Well, that's the direction, Mr. President, to be self-reliant on our military needs, Mr. President. And hopefully, later on, we can invite investors to come here and build facilities that will manufacture drones and other military equipment, Mr. President. That's the aspiration, Mr. President.
But only if conditions will provide in order for this opportunity to come in the near future.
Mr. President, the proposal of the Department of National Defense is to amend the Self-Reliant Defense Posture Law. That will allow equity investments, Mr. President, in the Philippines so that we can attract defense manufacturers to come here to the Philippines. Like, for example, Korea is a big defense exporter and we can invite them to set up shop here, Mr. President. That is the direction.
What lessons from the Russian-Ukraine war have our experts in the DND derived in relation to the need for indigenous military capability?
Well, Mr. President, there are many lessons that the department derived from that Russian-Ukraine war. One is the indigenous capability in manufacturing, Mr. President, and actually I've seen some documentaries that because of that war, the Ukraine defense manufacturing industry had a resurgence. They now produce virtually most of the things that they need to repel the Russian invasion. Number two is another lesson is no, you cannot rely on one country in terms of one country alone to on both sides, Mr. President, on defense support, Mr. President. So it's important to also have alliances with different like-minded nations, Mr. President.
So what steps does the DND take, Mr. President, to build our indigenous military capability? And if so, which part of the budget that we now consider will be devoted to ensuring such indigenous capability?
Well, Mr. President, the aspiration is to produce our own technology, defense technology, Mr. President. But the department strongly recommends the amendment of the Self-Reliance Defense Posture Law so that government can so the government can invest in research and development, as well as the government can invest in defense manufacturing investments, Mr. President. So because of that law, there are limitations in terms of what government can do in defense manufacturing, Mr. President.
I'd like to hear a better word, Mr. President, than aspiration. Parang aspiration, malayong-malayo pang mararating na. Can we use another term para kahit paano
the vision.
Hindi yung lilipad-lipad na...
The vision.
Yan.
The actualization, Mr. President. Yun naman talaga ho ang gusto ho natin because it also creates jobs and technology transfer. But it's, as you know, no, the defense is also very complicated and the technology is not readily available.
Yes, Mr. President, talagang yun ang aking gustong tunguhan kasi can you imagine the Mutual Defense Treaty is 74 years old? Kahit papaano nating kwentahin ito, Mr. President, talagang wala. Pasensya na kayo kung exasperated ako, pero
Mr. President, if you've seen the last 3 years, yung mga balikatan exercises had ramped up tremendously, Mr. President. And that's clear evidence that the Mutual Defense Treaty is doing its responsibility, Mr. President.
yes,
Goal.
but they fell short in being able to satisfy our requirement that our country is now in a clear position of being able to repel armed attack. Ayoko nang bumalik doon. Yung kasilangan punto ron Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, last comment, actually under the leadership of Secretary Teodoro, doon po talaga nag-umpisa itong ramping up ng mga alliances with our like-minded partners, Mr. President. And with that, doon rin nag-umpisa yung investments rin ho natin sa modernization. Kaya this year, Mr. President, pinakamalaking modernization fund ang ilalagay po ng Senado para po makahabol ho tayo sa mga pangangailangan ho natin.
Yun po yung gusto ko sabihin, Mr. President. Nakabawi-bawi tayo ng konti dahil nandyan ang aking kaibigan, Secretary Gibo Teodoro. Kung wala pa siya dyan, paano na? Kasi hindi natin masasabi kung mananatili siya dyan. Pwede siyang...
yung palang punto nyo, Mr. President. Nakuha ko na ho.
Kaya nga Would you say that militarization rather than diplomacy is the main mode of dispute settlement of China?
No, Mr. President. Absolutely not, Mr. President.
Okay. So, ang main tool po natin is diplomacy insofar as the Philippines is concerned.
Yes, Mr. President. But it's at the same time, Mr. President, it's to our best and core interest to continuously modernizing our capability, Mr. President.
Yung po mga diplomatic efforts natin, ano-ano po yun? Sana hindi lang po mga diplomatic protest tsaka yung tinatawag nilang megaphone diplomacy. Are there actual negotiations and are there budgets devoted for these actual negotiations para yung diplomacy makita natin po talagang nag-ooperate?
Mr. President, under the budgets of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Mr. President, merong mga amounts there to to continuously engage our partners as well as other countries in diplomacy, Mr. President.
Yan lang po ang kailangan natin, diplomacy. Hindi po yung makikipaggera, wala ho tayong laban dyan, mga kababayan. Ang unahin po muna nila dito, yung corruption ang gawin muna ng ating gobyerno bago ito pag-uusapan yung mga gera-gera. Hindi po tayo arm and equip, tsaka wala ho tayong mga budget yan. Kulang ang budget natin kasi inuuna pa nila yung magpayaman itong gobyerno natin. Hanggang dito na lang ho muna tayo, mga kababayan. Maraming salamat po. Isang share, like, subscribe lamang po para updated po tayo lagi dito sa ating bansa. Ito po ang News That Matters, mga kababayan. Mag-iingat po kayo palagi and God bless.